November 1891. San Rafael Swell, Utah Territory. The dwelling looked wrong. That's what everyone remarked upon first seeing it. Tucked into the base of the mesa as if attempting to conceal itself. The ridge of the roof barely peeked over the tough scrub brush. Rock walls seemed to melt into the hillside. No conventional chimney stack. No upstairs level. Just a squat, low-profile structure that appeared to hunker down against the approaching cold. Ilara Vance had engineered it that way deliberately. The central issue wasn't whether she was eccentric. Most folks had already concluded that. The actual concern was whether she would weather her inaugural winter inside it, because the winters in the swell offered no quarter for errors. And according to every stonemason, every rancher, every individual who had erected shelter in Utah Territory, Ilara had made nothing but blunders. The chill was already descending. Early snowfall had dusted the higher plateaus. The juniper trees along the dry wash had shed their needles a fortnight early. Old-timers were predicting a brutal season, the sort that separated the self-sufficient from the deceased. Ilara's nearest neighbors were stockpiling fuel, stacks upon stacks of it. Juniper, scrub oak, whatever would ignite, because everyone knew the formula. A modest soddy required a minimum of 3 cords, a larger one 5 or 6. You ran out of fuel. You succumbed to the cold. But Ilara wasn't hauling wood, she was compacting soil. If you're viewing this from a location with central heating press, that follow button, because what Ilara grasped about geology and thermal retention is knowledge that might someday prove vital to your own survival. And leave a note sharing your current location. I'm eager to see how many of you are battling genuine winter right now. Ilara Vance wasn't native to the territory. She had relocated westward from Vermont after her spouse perished in a mining collapse. 29 years old, no kin nearby. A homestead claim registered solely in her name. 160 acres of alkali dust and relentless wind. The established local practice was straightforward frame it, with timber sheath the exterior, with planks top it, with a shake roof. Build up 2 stories if lumber could be afforded. A massive hearth. Sealed windows, burned timber from early autumn through late spring. Ilara had 2 fundamental objections to that methodology. Firstly, timber was scarce on her plot. The nearest significant growth was 6 miles north, and she lacked even a basic cart. Trekking logs by foot was simply infeasible. Not enough supply, not enough time. Secondly, she had calculated the sheer labor of the wood requirement. 3 cords minimum translated to cutting, splitting, and stacking approximately 384 cubic feet of fuel. For a solitary woman, that was 2 months of sheer effort, perhaps 3, and winter was only 8 weeks away. So she undertook an action that seemed utterly preposterous. She excavated into the slope. Not a root cellar, not a shallow dugout for storage. An actual habitation space, dug back into the south-facing gradient behind her parcel roughly 12 feet into firm clay and sandstone bedrock. The side walls were pure earth. The overhead support relied on discarded rail ties she had bartered labor to acquire. The facade, the only boundary exposed to the elements, was meticulously stacked fieldstone bound with clay mortar. 1 modest glazed opening, 1 low entranceway, the cap covered with a full 8 inches of dense sod. Grass still green on top. Inside, she carved a sleeping shelf into the back stratum. Storage cubbies. A small fire pit, not a proper stove, merely fire brick and a crude flue venting upward through the roof. The entire dwelling would consume perhaps 1/10 the fuel of a standard cabin. But here was the critical unseen element. She had built it to interface with the thermal inertia of the land itself. Subsoil temperature 6 feet down remains constant all year in this region that hovers near 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Not cozy, but decidedly above freezing. The ground is indifferent to the atmospheric reading. It maintains equilibrium. Ilara's structure wasn't battling the winter directly, it was leveraging the Earth's retained warmth. The substantial earthen walls function like a reservoir, dampening sudden temperature shifts. The sod roof provided an insulating blanket. The southern stone face absorbed daylight during the brief sunlit hours, storing it and radiating it back into the space after dark. She wasn't aiming to elevate the interior from 10 degrees to a summer-like 70. She was planning to nudge it from 48 degrees up to a comfortable 65. A completely different calculation, a vastly reduced fuel demand. But try convincing a settler who has been feeding 6 cords of juniper to a stove for 20 years. The critique began before she even finished capping the roof. Garrett Hayes, whose claim abutted hers to the east, rode over one afternoon and simply stared. Ilara was tamping the sod layers, pressing them firmly. "You intend to reside in that?" he questioned. "I do." "Looks like a badger den." "Badgers fare well in the cold." He didn't smirk. "You realize what happens when the spring thaw hits. That entire thing will liquefy into muck. Front walls will shear. You'll drown in your sleep." Ilara kept compacting. "Drainage flows downhill. I cut channels. You'll freeze stiff. Perhaps. You possess no functional flue, no airflow whatsoever. You'll suffocate or freeze, whichever comes first." She glanced up. "I value the commentary." He just shook his head. "It's not commentary. It's an investment against having to dig your remains out come April." Word traveled swiftly. By late October, Ilara's dugout in the earth had become the subject of ridicule at the Silver Creek Junction trading post. Men she had never encountered offered opinions. Thaddeus Croft, a carpenter who had raised half the shacks in the swell, made a point of visiting himself. He paced the circumference, kicked the stone front, ducked inside for maybe 15 seconds. When he emerged, he declared, "This isn't a homestead. It's a cold tomb you're planning to occupy. And I'll detail the failures for you. You have no proper draw for that fire pit. Smoke will linger in there like morning mist. You have zero effective buffer between you and that damp soil. Moisture will wick right through frost on the interior surface, turning the whole place into an icebox. And that sod, lid-heavy snow, will cause it to cave in right on top of you." He regarded her like an inexperienced child attempting advanced calculus. "I have been erecting structures in this territory for 16 years. I know what functions. This does not." Even the women folk were dubious, though their disapproval was quieter. At the Sunday meeting, Ilara overheard one of them, Loretta Stern, speaking to another homesteader's spouse. "Poor soul doesn't grasp the basics. Came out here alone, refuses to listen. A woman can't simply excavate a pit and call it a dwelling. She'll be pleading for space in someone's barn by the new year." The most galling aspect wasn't the doubt. It was the pity. They had already written her off. The major squall struck the second week of December. It began with the wind, a cold, steady, unyielding blast, the kind that penetrated every aperture in every wall, every hairline fracture in every door seal. By the second day, snow followed, not the dry, powdery flakes of early chill, heavy, wet snow that adhered to every surface. The temperature plummeted to 11 degrees Fahrenheit the first night, then 6. Then on the third night, -4. Throughout the swell, settlers were exhausting their wood supply as fast as they could process it. Fires blazed continuously day and night. Families huddled near their iron stoves, piling on quilts, stuffing scraps into window casings. Garrett Hayes consumed nearly half a cord in 3 days. His cabin, built to standard specifications, couldn't retain warmth. The wind stripped it away. Every time he opened the portal to bring in fuel, the internal temperature dropped 10 degrees. His young ones slept fully dressed. Croft the carpenter had a larger structure, better sealed. He burned slower, but perpetually. Still, he was feeding his stove every 4 hours throughout the night. His wife kept a kettle simmering just to inject some humidity into the air, which had become brittle dry from the ceaseless heating. At the trading post, men began bartering for green wood, anything that would combust. Desperation arithmetic. By day 5, some households were cannibalizing their furniture for fuel. And then someone posed the question, has anyone checked on the Vance woman? No one had. Hayes volunteered mostly out of a sense of civic duty. He expected to find her either perished or gone, perhaps having sought refuge elsewhere. He rode out on the 6th day, snow still drifting, wind still vicious. When he crested the ridge above her claim, he observed smoke-thin, almost invisible nothing, like the dense, dark pillar of a raging inferno. Just a ghost of a plume. He dismounted, approached the low door, and rapped. Ilara opened it. She wore a thick wool shirt, no outer layer, her hair dry, her exposed skin intact. Behind her, the interior held a dim, even warmth. "You well," Hayes managed. "Fine. And you." He stepped closer, sensing the air issuing from within. Warm, not scorching, but genuinely warm. Stable. "How much fuel have you been using?" "Perhaps 1 small piece of juniper per day." "Sometimes 2. He was aghast. "That's impossible. Come witness the proof." He stepped inside. The chamber was perhaps 12 by 14 feet, low ceiling, yet the air was utterly still, dry, warm enough that he could feel the numbness receding from his fingers. The fire pit contained only embers, just coals, no active flame. "You've been sustaining this the whole time." "On and off, mostly off." "How are you not frostbitten?" Alara gestured toward the walls, the earth encasing them. "The ground doesn't freeze. It holds near 50 degrees, maybe slightly less. I'm not heating from near zero. I'm boosting from 50. One small burn in the morning, one at dusk if the wind is truly brutal. That is the extent of it." Hayes placed a hand on the rear wall. Dirt yet dry. Solid, warm to the touch, as if retaining heat. "The earth stores it," Ilar explained. "I don't need to maintain an open fire. I only need to elevate the baseline temperature a few degrees, and the surrounding mass holds it there." Hayes remained silent for a considerable duration. "How long has that fire pit been dormant?" "Since yesterday afternoon. It was still tempered inside. Stay with me, because the metrics Ilara's dugout achieved utterly eclipsed every builder in the swell. If this narrative is compelling, tap that like icon and share your thoughts below. I want to hear from those battling extreme conditions. By the time the blizzard finally broke, Ilar had consumed less than 1/10 of a cord of wood, perhaps 80 small pieces in total, split thin and smoldered. Garrett Hayes had burned 4 cords. Croft the carpenter 3.5. The disparity was in the application of principles. A typical plank and shake cabin in a Utah winter loses thermal energy in 3 vectors: conduction through the walls, convection via gaps and drafts, and radiation from window panes. You are fighting ambient air that could be 10 degrees or lower. The only thing insulating you is wood, which offers an R value of maybe 1.4 per inch. A standard wall might achieve an R10 if built exceptionally well. You are hemorrhaging BTUS. Ilara's structure ignored the outside air. It was nestled within the thermal mass of the ground, which at 6 feet depth maintained a consistent 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The compacted soil walls possessed an effective R value, closer to R20 or R25, depending on moisture density. More crucially, they were sheltered from frigid gales. The sod roof contributed an additional R10 to R15, which was further enhanced by the overlying snowpack during the storm. When Ilara ignited her fire, she wasn't attempting a 65-degree jump from zero. She was seeking a 17-degree nudge from 48. That explains why one small log sufficed. The thermal mass of the surrounding earth absorbed the heat from her small fire and re-radiated it slowly across many hours. The fire pit wasn't required to remain lit. The walls themselves became the heat source. During the coldest night of the tempest, when the exterior plunged to -4, the temperature within Ilara's shelter never dipped below 52 degrees. Insufficient for ease without a wrap, but safely above freezing. Secure. Hayes's cabin conversely dropped to 38 degrees overnight despite a roaring fire. 3 days post-storm, a contingent of settlers arrived to observe the phenomenon firsthand. Croft was among them. He brought a precise mercury thermometer. Exterior reading, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Interior reading fire cold for 6 hours, 56 degrees. He stood there, staring at the readings, then at the earthen envelope. "I'll eat my hat," he stated softly. Barnaby Rourke, the pragmatic homesteader, asked the unspoken query. "How much capital did this cost you to raise?" Ilara mentally tallied. Timber for supports, perhaps $12. Stone gathered personally. Mortar mix, $3. Tools already owned. Total expenditure, $15 and roughly 3 weeks of dedicated labor. Rourke's cabin had demanded $200 in lumber alone. The economics were brutal for those who followed the established path. Croft circled the perimeter again, this time deliberately examining details he had previously dismissed. The carefully graded drainage trench, the southern wall's precise angle to capture maximum winter solar gain, the sod layers compressed and fused. "I called this a grave," he confessed, not meeting her eyes. "I was mistaken. The paradigm shifts slowly, but it shifts." By 1893, 3 homesteads within 10 miles of Ilara's claim had begun implementing modifications to their structures. Not full subterranean builds, but calculated adjustments. Banking earth against northern exposures, applying thick sod caps to roofs, angling foundations into slopes rather than building flat on exposed ground. Rourke, the man who questioned the cost, went the furthest. He dug a supplemental root cellar but extended it, converting it into a dedicated winter sleeping chamber. 8 by 10 feet, carved into the hillside stone front wall, featuring a small cast iron burner. His family took refuge there from January through March. He later informed others it slashed his wood consumption by 60%. Croft, the carpenter who had labeled Ilara's structure a tomb, did not commit to an earth-shelter design himself. However, when a newlywed couple contracted him for a cabin build that spring, he proposed they consider a substantial earth berm along the north and west faces. Adds thermal flywheel effect, he advised. Keeps you warmer on less fuel. He conveniently omitted the source of that wisdom. By 1896, the swell exhibited 11 constructions incorporating some level of earth berming or thermal mass integration. Some were complete dugouts mirroring Ilara's design. Others were hybrids, half submerged with the front wall exposed. A few were traditional cabins with 6 feet of packed earth banked against the rear and sides. They all remained warmer. They all required less fuel. The technique lacked a formal name. Locals simply referred to it as building smart or the Vance method. Ilara remained in her earth home for 4 more severe winters. She eventually erected a separate above-ground structure for summer living and storage. But every November, she retreated back into the hillside, warm, dry, stable. The ground proved utterly reliable. In 1899, an inspector from the Territorial Land Office toured the region cataloging claims. He logged Ilara's dwelling in his report, noting it as ingeniously conceived for fuel economy and consistent thermal performance. He sketched the cross-section diagram. That drawing eventually found its way into a dusty file cabinet in Helena, where it rested for years. But the concept did not require official documentation to propagate. It spread because it delivered tangible results. Here is the core principle Ilara understood that most overlooked. Cold isn't something you conquer through sheer brute force. It's something you manage via applicable physics. The Earth is unconcerned with the air temperature fluctuations. 6 feet down, stability reigns 45 to 50 degrees year-round, applicable from Utah to the Canadian territories to the Scandinavian fjords. That is free thermal mass, free insulation, free stability. Contemporary building science has since validated what Ilara demonstrated in 1891. Earth-sheltered dwellings, when properly detailed, can slash heating expenditures by 50 to 90% compared to conventional stick-built homes. The ground acts as a thermal capacitor. It absorbs summer heat and releases it in winter. It buffers against extremes. It doesn't combust. It doesn't require ongoing upkeep. The true hurdle was never the physics. The science was sound. The challenge was convincing people that an unfamiliar approach could be more astute than what they had always practiced. Ilara convinced no one with rhetoric. She persuaded them with winter data, with empirical results, with the clear, undeniable reality that her structure remained habitable while theirs struggled. And here is the takeaway for you watching now. The strategies Ilara deployed are not merely historical footnotes. They are active, applicable laws of nature. If you are planning an off-grid build, if you seek to minimize energy reliance, if you reside in a region with harsh winters, the ground beneath you is an asset you are likely neglecting. You don't need to live in a burrow, but you can adopt the concept. Earth berming thermal mass walls, subgrade foundations, passive solar alignment. These are not primitive methods. They are fundamentally efficient ones. Ilara Vance was not a certified architect. She was a claimant with an 80-acre parcel and a logistical problem. She assessed her available resources, dirt, stone, and sun, and created a functional, self-sustaining system. Those who mocked her weren't unintelligent. They simply couldn't look beyond their ingrained methods. Innovation rarely announces itself with fanfare. Sometimes it manifests as a woman patiently packing soil onto a roof while her neighbors jeer, until the first severe frost arrives, and then the numbers deliver the final verdict. So here is my concluding query for you. Where are you tuning in from? And what was the most brutal winter you have ever endured? Jot it down in the comments. I want to hear from those confronting genuine cold, the kind that forces you to scrutinize every single BTU. And if this narrative provided any insight, please select the follow button. Each week, I bring forward one proven technique, one piece of rediscovered ingenuity, one solution that prevailed when existence truly depended on it, because the most brilliant solutions don't always originate from the loudest voices. Sometimes they emerge from the quiet ones packing earth, crunching numbers, and waiting for the season to validate their foresight.